This is the most notorious haunted house in the world. It is to be found in the sleepy seaside town of Amityville, an hour away from the hustle and bustle of New York City. 30 years ago, a truly horrifying crime was committed here, when 6 members of the DeFeo family were shot dead in a single night. Even now, the details of exactly how these brutal murders were carried out remain shrouded in mystery. 1 year later, the Lutz family moved in. They fled from the house, having lived there for only 28 days, claiming that they had been driven out by terrifying and unexplained supernatural forces. Their story was the subject of a media frenzy, turned them into celebrities, and became a worldwide bestseller, The Amityville Horror. It would spawn numerous books and films, including one that was released just this year. Mediums and psychic investigators have claimed there is a curse on the property. Others say that the Lutz's story is no more than a clever money-making scheme, built on the gruesome history of the house.
It is probably one of the most haunted homes in the world. It's certainly one of the most publicized haunted homes in the world.
Whatever happened, it was a confluence of events and personalities, and it meshed to form the perfect psychic storm.
It's just this web of lies, and the motivation was simple enough.
They produced a beautiful commercial scam. Their version is not a true story, but if they call it a true story, you know, how can you say that they're liars?
There were too many things that had happened and were going on to sit there in denial that something wasn't right with this.
I guess the Amityville Horror really is supposed to be me, because I'm the one that got convicted of killing my family. I'm the one who said did it. I'm the one that's supposed to be possessed by the devil.
What is the truth about the house in Amityville? And is there really a curse on all who live there? The mysteries and controversies surrounding the Amityville story begin with the horrific events that took place on the night of November 13th, 1974, when 6 members of the DeFeo family, mother, father, and 4 children, were shot to death inside this house.
I had an office in the front of my house, and I was sitting in the office, and my friend Al Saxon comes in, and he says, "Rufus, I got something to tell you. You're not going to believe this." He says, "Everybody next door is dead."
We saw several of the bodies being taken out. I'm sorry to say one of the children's bodies fell off the tarp they were carrying it in, and I saw one of the murdered children.
It was ghastly, but pretty straightforward murder case, or at least that's what I thought at the time.
It was just very eerie. It was very quiet, and just a chilling, frozen moment, the kind that you never forget. It's a picture that you keep in your head always.
Here you had so-called idyllic suburban family, Italian Catholic. The family had its own business, which was an auto dealership. And of course, with an Italian surname, there are the inevitable whispers about connections to organized crime.
A mob killing was quickly ruled out, and the police began to focus on the only surviving member of the family, 23-year-old Ronald DeFeo Jr.
George Harrison came, who was chief of detectives over in Suffolk County, and he said, "Can I use your house for a while for our headquarters?" Everybody in my neighborhood was scared to death that there's somebody loose in this town.
From the beginning, Butch DeFeo, Ronnie DeFeo Jr., was suspected. He was originally not arrested. He was taken into protective custody.
They decided now they're going to take Ireland's house, which was next door, and turn that into their command post. So they took us all over there.
Next thing I know, they had him in my house, and they were questioning him.
That went on for some time until his grandfather showed up. A police officer heard Ronnie's grandfather tell him, "You'll stop throwing the family name in the mud. I don't want to hear anything more about your sister. Just admit to the murders. It's over."
I told them in the beginning things that were true, but, you know, they get the pressure off of me.
Even before this, the Amityville locals had already made their minds up about who had slaughtered the family.
I walked around the neighborhood and I said, can you tell me anything more about what happened? And almost to the person, every kid said, Ronnie did it, Ronnie did it.
I was in my car. I believe the reporter was Joe Martin. Came on and said that the killings had happened. And they didn't say that Ronnie was dead with them. And I said to my wife, it was Ronnie.
Ronnie was, put it this way, a wild teenager.
He had a reputation for using drugs, for violence, for fighting with his father.
He was a punk. All he did was drink, gamble, and fight. If you knew him, and you knew the situation, I guess, or you ever spent any time around him, it was not something that he was incapable of doing. And when everybody else is dead and he's not, you know.
There was a lot of problems, you know, and it's not that I could sit here and lie to you. I could say that I knew something bad was going to happen to my mother and father.
Within a short time afterwards, Ronald DeFeo Jr. was officially named the suspect. He was the alleged murderer. He was the accused.
After a short, sharp interrogation, DeFeo confessed to the crimes and gave the first of many versions of what happened.
The standard story is basically Ronald DeFeo Jr., who was then 23 in 1974, woke up at approximately 3:15 a.m. and for reasons unknown, basically killed his entire family while they slept.
He took the rifle and shot both of his parents who were sleeping in the master bedroom. Then he shot his younger brothers, 2 of them. And then he went to an adjacent bedroom and shot his sister. And then he walked up to the 3rd floor bedroom and shot his other sister, Dawn.
After what happened, it was like a nightmare. I'm looking at my mother and father dead, my sister. I said, my God. I got scared. I ran out of the house, jumped in my car, ran down the street, got my friends, and came back to the house.
DeFeo's confession did not explain a number of puzzling mysteries about the killings. Mysteries that would prompt rumors of accomplices, conspiracies, and even supernatural influence.
They were each shot with a .35 Marlin. We had an experiment conducted when we were preparing for trial, the noise level of the .35 Marlin, and that Marlin could be heard close to 4 to 5 blocks away from the house.
Nobody heard a thing. I did find, however, one of the neighbors who heard at about between 3 and 3:30 in the morning the family's dog barking. It was crying or baying.
With all the shots that took place, there were approximately 9 blasts from a Marlin. There was no evidence that any of the 6 victims had made any attempt to escape.
What was so odd is how you managed to shoot 6 people in the middle of the night in a quiet neighborhood without awakening any of the people. A shotgun blast is pretty loud. That doesn't make any sense.
One might argue, well, maybe they were being held by another gunman and told not to move until Ronnie came around and did what he did.
I thought perhaps the bodies had been moved from their original spots. The autopsy reports show that no, they were not moved, that they were in the original places that they were when they were shot. There were no drugs found in the bloodstreams. And again, the victims are found lying face down in death with the arms outstretched as if placed there. There seems to be something almost systematic and very methodical about it that would seem to involve in more than just one person.
The curious anomalies of the crime scene would provide some eerie clues as to who or what had been responsible for the killings in Amityville. After Ronald DeFeo had confessed to shooting his entire family, attorney William Weber found himself faced with the difficult task of defending him. Weber began by investigating what went on in the DeFeo home.
The family life at the DeFeo residence was kind of bizarre and unusual, because on one hand, they appeared to be very religious artifacts throughout the house, statues throughout the exterior of the house, but inside, when Mr. DeFeo was there was constant fighting, bickering, yelling, screaming, activities that would go way beyond normal fighting that families may have.
There were beatings that often would occur for no particular reason, from what I understand. The father would just fall into these terrible rages, and Ronald often became the focus of those rages.
Ronnie's friends were afraid to come into the house because they were just afraid of the father. There was testimony about the father beating the wife in the presence of Ronnie's friends.
And that kind of abuse often leads to abuse of others that are weaker or more subordinate.
So when you look beyond the nice, quiet, suburban street, there were troubles in that family.
Many people told me about the abuse he received as a child from his father. On the other hand, I was also told about the great love he received from his mother and his close relationship with his brothers and one of the two sisters. So he was a very unusual and difficult personality.
We were really a close family, you know. It's a shame what happened, but it happened.
The other thing about Ronald DeFeo, of course, was he immediately started ranting and raving from prison that the devil made him do it.
Some priest was in the courtroom watching my performance on the witness stand. He felt that my performance, I had to be possessed by the devil.
You know, there were echoes of Charles Manson from the late 60s and the Sharon Tate murders in California. Ronald DeFeo had that same wild-eyed look as Charles Manson.
I don't think he was dealing with a full deck. Yeah, you gotta be insane to kill your own family, or well on your way.
I asked a friend and associate, Dr. Daniel Schwartz, to interview him. Dan gave a professional opinion that Ronnie was acting in another state of mind, that he didn't understand the nature of his acts, or that what he was doing was wrong.
It was out of my control. I did not have touch with reality at the time I did what I did. I had no control over that.
Weber decided on a plea of insanity. When he interviewed DeFeo about what he remembered happening on the night of the murders, a strange series of events was described that would prompt speculation about who was behind the killings.
Ronnie had taken some drugs. He was watching television, and there was a war picture on. And at the end of the picture, Ronnie was in the room alone. He said initially he thought that he heard members of his family in another room conspiring to kill him. The one thing that he said, and sometimes he said it with a smirk, so I wasn't sure if it was truthful, but he said that a female with black hands gave me the rifle, and I went ahead and shot everybody.
His original testimony was that at some point, a hooded, black-handed demon handed him a weapon, and that he went upstairs, and that he committed the murder. He said the murder, not the murders.
During the trial, one expert argued that DeFeo may not have acted alone.
Herman Race was a criminologist hired by the defense. Herman Race, in a closed courtroom, that means they cleared out the public, told the judge and the prosecutor that some of the bodies had been moved, that they were not all killed in the positions they were found. He also said that he believed that multiple weapons were used, not just one high-powered rifle.
Intriguingly, many years later, journalist Rick Moran was contacted by a drug enforcement agent who told him that he had the DeFeo home under observation at the time of the killings and had seen Ronnie's sister, Dawn, leave the house.
On the night of the murder, that operative did see Dawn DeFeo wearing a snorkel-type jacket and gloves come out of the house with a rifle, throw the rifle into the backseat of her car, and drive out towards the point where the city has a dock, which is exactly where the weapon was found by police divers later on. When he told the police that a hooded, black-handed demon came to him and handed him the weapon, but that he didn't move, I believe that it's true. I don't think he was in any condition to move. The demon that he was talking about was his own sister.
Dawn DeFeo's night clothes show unburnt powder, which indicates she may have fired a rifle that night.
Moran's theory is that Ronnie and his sister Dawn had plotted to kill their parents together.
I think on the night that they decided they were going to do that, Ron was in no condition to be able to do it. And that Dawn took a long rifle and committed the murder. Unfortunately, in the frenzy of it, she apparently decided she was going to take out everybody.
I've always been partial to the idea that indeed something special existed between Ronald DeFeo and his sister Dawn. Now, some say that that was incest, I don't know, but there was a special connection, a special bond, perhaps a bond of secrecy. She was the one that was killed the most violently. The head is just completely exploded.
The theory is that Dawn DeFeo killed the family and that Ronnie, in despair, murdered Dawn. So he's responsible for one murder, which would also explain the grandfather's reaction of, you'll take all of the refs, because he was the only one who was left, and he didn't want to see anything more about relationships within the household or his family name being sullied.
In fact, the jury found Ronald DeFeo to be guilty of all the murders and to be of sound mind. He was given 6 life sentences in February 1975. The DeFeo home at 112 Ocean Avenue was put up for sale at a knockdown price because of its ghastly history. It was then that George and Kathleen Lutz, newlyweds with a young family, went to view the house, and the next extraordinary chapter of the Amityville horror began.
When you look at enough homes, you get a sense for what feels good to you and what doesn't. This house had no reservations for us. It was the answer to so many different things that we thought would be perfection of a sort. We discussed the events that had happened in the house as a family and came to the decision that we would all be okay with the history of what had happened. But I don't think any of us considered the possibility that there would be something residual there.
According to the Lutzes, there were unsettling occurrences from the very beginning.
Harry tried to hang himself, our dog, our black Labrador retriever. He jumped over the fence, and his chain was too short, and he was actually hanging on the wrong side of the fence, choking to death. That was all within the first hour of moving in.
George Lutz then says that a good friend who knew the history of the house strongly advised him to have it blessed.
The priest came and went about the house blessing and came out and told Kathy and I not to use the one upstairs bedroom we were going to use as a sewing room as a bedroom. He said he felt something in there. And he was slapped. He heard a voice tell him to get out. Those were 2 things that were immediate first day, first few hours.
Within the first few days, George Lutz claims he found himself waking regularly at 3:15 in the morning, feeling restless, uneasy, and often hearing strange noises. Significantly, this was the time when the DeFeo murders were estimated to have taken place.
I got very sick in the house and lost a lot of weight, lost days at work. My own personal hygiene changed there.
He was undergoing personality changes. He would snap at the family. He and Kathy were having arguments. He could not get warm. He was constantly outside chopping wood, building fires. Kathy would go to different rooms in the house and feel different things.
She was embraced by what she felt was someone, a woman. When she told me about it, she was quite frightened and quite disturbed by it.
The Lutzes reported swarms of houseflies infesting certain rooms, highly unusual in midwinter. They were also becoming increasingly anxious about the behavior of their daughter, Missy.
Missy started to explain to Kathy that she had a friend, the friend's name was Jody, that had represented itself to her as a large pig. When Jody told her that he was glad she was there and she was going to be living there forever, that was quite disturbing.
As the days went past, the Lutzes claimed that more and more strange things were happening around them.
when you hear screams at night and you hear footsteps at night and the kids are saying strange things and the temperatures in the house vary and the spots that would appear on the carpet in the morning, the progression of certain toilets turning black, the china actually turning black. When you sit down and you start talking about those, then there's obviously something wrong.
They still don't like to talk about what happened that very last night that finally drove them from the house.
I will never be able to set aside what had gone on that night, all night, and the boys, the way they looked and what they said when they came down that morning.
Come on, babies, come on! Come on, get out!
The Lutz family say they finally fled from the house in the early morning of January 14th, 1976. They would never return.
We did not move in and move out as the same family. All of us were quite frightened by the time we left and knew of no fear when we moved in. And the fear alone was something that changed all of us.
The Lutzes moved in with Kathy's mother, and George took steps to get the house investigated.
I had contacted a fellow by the name of Kaplan, who had represented himself as a parapsychologist. I wanted to find out he's a vampirologist, and that was supposed to give him credibility, which it didn't with me.
My husband did tell him that we don't charge you anything, but we are a public service organization, and if we find something backing what you say is there, we will tell the public what we found. And if we find that there isn't anything, we'll tell the public that. And if we find that you're putting us on and this is a hoax, we'll also tell them that.
3 days later, George Lutz contacted Kaplan again.
He was very upset by some quote that my husband had said in the newspaper saying that he would be investigating. And he said, I told you I didn't want any publicity, and, you know, I'm going to have to now postpone your investigation for at least a couple of weeks because we didn't want any publicity about this. And my husband found out the next day that that was the same day that Lutz and his wife had given this press conference in the morning. So in the morning he's giving a press conference, and in the evening he's telling us he's canceling our investigation because he doesn't want the publicity.
In an extraordinary twist, this press conference was organized by none other than William Weber, Ronald DeFeo's defense attorney. Weber was now representing DeFeo in the appeal against his earlier conviction. Seemingly, he and the Lutzes had made contact in the immediate aftermath of their leaving the house.
Weber called a press conference with Newsday and told us that Newsday demanded that we be there.
Again, a bell went off with my husband. Why is William Weber, the defense attorney for the mass murderer Ronald DeFeo, now representing this gentleman Lutz, who had moved into the house afterwards, and what's the connection there?
I was approached by a Paul Hoffman, who at the time was a freelance writer for the news, and indicated that the Lutzes would like to meet with me. And I said, you know, I too would like to meet with them because coincidentally I had been given an oral commitment that we would get a large advance for a book and a movie.
Weber never, in those first meetings, ever brought up the idea of that. He was very keen on helping his client get psychological help. At least that's what we were led to believe. We felt that what happened to us was an indication of what quite possibly could have also affected him.
At one particular meeting, Weber claims he revealed some key details of the DeFeo crime, details that were to be of vital significance in the Lutz's subsequent story.
We were there from about 9 or 10 in the evening to 3 in the morning, drinking wine. And I can't tell you how many bottles of wine we had, but it was many. I had photographs of the crime scene, and based upon the photographs and other facts that I had related, we developed what ultimately turned out to be part of the Lutz's version of the possession aspect of the case.
The Lutzes let me listen to a tape recording that they had made with William Weber. And in fact, George Lutz, before playing the tape, prefaced his remarks to me and said, I'm not particularly proud of this.
For instance, I showed them pictures of the blackish, greenish fingerprint powder that was all over the house. put there by the police who were looking for fingerprints. And they said, wow, look, there's the slime coming from the doors. We had pictures of Dawn's third-floor bedroom that had dead flies all over it. Well, they took Dawn's room, and they had flies flying around all the time. They supplemented the facts that I was telling them about the case, and it all appeared in their book.
I think when they sobered up, or the cold light of day, they felt, maybe this didn't feel right to them. But in this tape, William Weber already had, he was purporting to say, hey, we can get movies, books, film rights. He was already talking about percentages and cutting deals.
He was in the process of putting together some kind of book and movie contract with DeFeo, and he sent a contract to our house that included paying DeFeo some 5% of whatever the proceeds were. So Weber was involved in actually trying to pay DeFeo for the murders. At that point, we broke off all contact with William Weber.
They just disappeared off the face of Long Island after that.
With the Lutzes underground, interest in the Amityville horror story was building, and New York TV station Channel 5 were determined to get the scoop.
I got in touch with George Lutz and said, your family needs help, because they were clearly terrified.
Laura called in a celebrated pair of psychic investigators based in Connecticut, Ed and Lorraine Warren.
The type of work that we do is investigation into the paranormal, the supernatural, the preternatural, from haunting phenomena caused by human spirits or through poltergeist activity or the demonic inhuman hauntings. We've worked on numerous possession cases and exorcisms, and Warner Brothers has the rights to our life.
George Lutz met us at the edge of the property. He did not even want to step foot onto the grounds.
It was a horribly foreboding type of a feeling throughout the whole house. You knew that this house was infested by something other than human spirits. That's for sure. That was more than obvious.
When the Lutz family claimed that their home in Amityville was possessed, a local TV station assembled a team of psychics and arranged to film their investigation of the house.
They got parapsychologists, they brought in some other psychics, and it was arranged to go in there on the night of March 6th, 1976.
Soon after the Channel 5 news team and their reporter Marvin Scott arrived at the house, people began behaving unusually.
Nothing happened to me, but things were happening to people around me.
The way people were affected was just crazy.
First thing that happened, our cameraman, Steve, got to the landing on the second floor, and all of a sudden he bent over, clutching his chest. He had stabbing chest pains.
The overwhelming impression was very sad.
I had the impression of a teenager who had done something that had changed his life entirely, and he had committed something horrendous.
When we went up to the second floor, of course, the psychics could feel the remnants or the bad vibes. 6 people had been murdered violently there, you know, not 2 years before.
There was a window above me, and I saw a face of a young girl looking out at me. Then I heard crying, weeping. So I said, look to the white light, walk towards it, and everybody you love is waiting for you.
Lorraine, during the seance, said that she felt like there was some evil here that was from the bowels of the earth. It was not just the murdered spirits of the dead DeFeos.
I could see bodies all lined up, all with white sheets over them.
I got the impression of like hooded figures like monks right outside the door, closing the door well, looking in at me. I thought, uh-oh.
I get to the top and I go into a room, and Marvin Scott said to me, what is it? What is it? I said to him, I hope this is as close to hell as I'll ever get.
So I took the holy water and I opened it and I said to him, get thee behind me, Satan. And I went like that. And you could hear like water on a hot stove go, and then everything in the house stopped.
After the seance was over, we proceeded downstairs. At that point, Ed had his crucifix and he was leading Lorraine. He stopped at one point, almost as if he was like thrown back by a gust of wind. And he later described it as being a